Bain Capital is an investment partnership which was formed to invest in startup companies and ongoing companies, then to take an active hand in managing them, and hopefully 5 to 8 years later to harvest them at a significant profit.
And so it begins, the battle for the future of America. Today, President Obama unveiled his vision for the United States by releasing his 2013 budget proposal. Remember, budgets aren't just numbers on a sheet. They're priorities and paths for the future. They define what investments we'll be making as a nation moving forward and how we're going to pay for those investments. Here was the President today pitching his vision.
The budget that we're releasing today is a reflection of shared responsibility. It says that if we're serious about investing in our future, in investing in community colleges, in investing in new energy technology, in investing in basic research, well, we've got to pay for it. And that means we've got to make some.
Here are some of the details or choices that the President lays out. Overall spending for the 2013 budget is pegged at $3.8 trillion. That includes significant new investments in roads and infrastructure, education, and our manufacturing sector. It also includes year-long extensions of emergency unemployment benefits and payroll tax cuts for 160 million working Americans. Then on the side of deficit reduction, the President proposes reducing the deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade. He does this by forcing millionaires and billionaires to pay their fair share of taxes. That means letting the Bush tax cuts expire for America's highest income earners, closing the capital gains tax loophole, and forcing people like Mitt Romney to at least pay the same tax rate as middle-class Americans, and closing a slew of corporate tax loopholes that are mostly taken advantage of by transnational oil corporations. There are also a few reforms to cut costs out of entitlement programs like Medicare and Medicaid, and a 5% reduction in the Defense Department budget over 10 years. But the bigger picture here is that the President has laid out a vision for America that makes much-needed investments to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, to educate a new generation of scientists and engineers, and to get America back to work building things again. All of it paid for by making the super-rich contribute just a little more. This is going to be the defining issue of the 2012 election. And it comes down to this. Are we going to tax millionaires and billionaires who've been paying historically low rates a little more so we can make critical investments to keep the American economy competitive in the 21st century? Or are we going to delay those critical investments just to protect the millionaires and billionaires from any sort of tax increase? Seems like common sense. Unfortunately, the President's budget is dead on arrival in the House of Representatives. That's because he's going up against one of the most radical Republican parties in our nation's history, a party that has a drastically different vision of America from the vast majority of the rest of us. There is a cycle of radicalism in the Republican Party. In fact, we've got it laid out here. Let me walk through it. This is basically the cycle from the entire 20th and part of the 21st century. So we start out at the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican president, a progressive. Back then there were progressive Republicans. In fact, there were a lot of them. And Teddy Roosevelt passed the Tillman Act in 1907 that made it illegal for corporations to give money to politicians. He busted up the trusts. The Republicans of that era were, quite significant. But it seems like every generation, I mean, literally every generation, there's this shift from rational Republicans to insane Republicans. 1920, Warren Harding comes into office. 1921, actually. His motto was more business in government, less government in business. He dropped the top income tax rate from 73% down to 25% in deregulated markets, which produced, of course, the bubble of the 20s and the crash of the 1930s. And so in this period of time, you had the New Deal Republicans basically during the FDR administration, and the New Deal Republicans, they were functionally powerless, actually. Then came in 1946 the Do Nothing Congress. This was during the presidency of Harry Truman, right after the war. And in this incredible Congress, it only lasted 2 years. They passed the Taft-Hartley Act that blew up the right of individuals to form a union to a large extent. At that point in time, right about here, We had 35% unionization in the country. It was the highest ever. Taft-Hartley began the destruction of that. Harry Truman introduced literally a universal single-payer health care system. They blocked that. Truman ran against it and was so successful that the Republicans didn't take the House again for 46 years. So they collapsed, and they were followed by a rational Eisenhower administration. Massive infrastructure investments. Eisenhower famously said, should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear that party again in our political history. There's a tiny splinter group, a few other Texas oil millionaires, and an occasional politician or businessman from other areas. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid. So that was the rational Eisenhower Republicans, but then a generation later came the irrational Goldwater Republicans, who opposed the civil rights laws, thought it was all about states' rights. They wanted a belligerent foreign policy, which just handed Lyndon Johnson the daisy ad, you know, hey, let's have a nuclear war. And, of course, Barry Goldwater wanted to cut taxes for the rich and deregulate industry. He failed, and they collapsed, and so we got the Nixon Republicans back to semi-rational Republicans. I mean, you could argue Nixon was mentally ill, but, you know, Nixon actually in 1973 proposed what is almost an absolute identical program as Obamacare. And I mean, go back and look at the history of it. It's quite astounding. They created the EPA during that time. Progressive taxation was, you know, strong and in place. In fact, the top tax rate was 91%. Richard Nixon thought that was just fine. The Nixon rational Republicans were followed by the radical Republicans again. Ronald Reagan. Reagan comes into office, created the biggest tax cut for the rich since Warren Harding, which produced, and by the way, that was so bad, I mean, that hurt the budget so badly, that he also passed the biggest tax increase on working people in the entire history of the United States. He started a war on working people by busting the Patco Union. This was in the spirit of the Do-Nothing Congress in 1946-47, Taft-Hartley. The result of Reagan's tax cuts, massive tax cuts, and his war on working people was a 12% unemployment rate, a great market crash. These were the worst since the Great Depression. The Reagan administration had the most convicted criminals of any administration in history and produced the biggest debt in history. That was followed by the rational Republicans, George H.W. Bush. Of course, the radicals didn't like him much. They kicked him out of office. And he was followed by his son, the irrational George W. Bush, who cut taxes on the rich again. Dick Cheney famously said deficits don't matter. They had 2 wars without funding, put a poison pill into Medicare in the post office. And then the radicals in the 2008 election, they lost power again. They lost the House, the Senate, and the White House. And then in 2010, the Tea Party came back. So I guess the question now for 2012 is what's going to happen with the moderate Republicans? Is it going to be Romney? Is it going to become a moderate Republican? How is this cycle going to play out? I'm not sure.
Well, with Representative Paul Ryan in Cincinnati tonight, there are some big questions emerging. While Democrats want to paint Congressman Ryan as someone who wants to recklessly cut spending, is he? Or is the congressman actually a big-time spender? In our Commitment to Balance News, Ben has the reality check you won't see anywhere else.
Well, we had hoped to sit down with the 7-term Wisconsin congressman and ask him some questions today. Despite our repeated requests, no dice. So what did I want to talk to Congressman Ryan about? Well, how about his spending record? For someone who has been deemed a great fiscal conservative, his recent history could prove otherwise. Go back a short 4 years to 2008, and Congressman Ryan was one of the lead voices pushing Republicans to vote for TARP. Remember TARP, the $700 billion bailout of Wall Street firms like Lehman Brothers? The big spending TARP bill that was the inspiration for the Tea Party in 2010 after lawmakers began bailing out financial firms. So here's a clip of Congressman Ryan in 2008 on the House floor making his case for TARP.
When Secretary Paulson came to us about a week ago, he gave us a 3-page bill that said, give me a blank checkbook and put $700 billion in it. I was offended at that time. And so what happened since then? We added 107 pages of taxpayer protection to that bill. We understand the gravity of this situation, and we worked with our colleagues on the other side to make this bill a better bill. We made sure that there's an insurance program that makes sure that Wall Street shares in the cost of this recovery plan. And we also made sure that the executives of these companies that made these bad bets don't profit from this rescue recovery plan.
But that wasn't true. Despite Ryan's promises that none of this taxpayer money would go to line the pockets of those who created this mess, it did. The New York Attorney General's office published a report on that bailout money in 2009. And the New York Times printed some of the report stating, quote, 9 of the financial firms that were among the largest recipients of federal bailout money paid about 5,000 of their traders and bankers bonuses of more than $1 million apiece for 2008. But the Wall Street crisis was an unusual situation, right? Well, maybe. But Ryan didn't just vote for TARP in 2008. A few months later, he also voted for the auto industry bailout. He voted for Medicare Part D, the largest expansion of Medicare in history. He voted for the massive highway bill that included that famous bridge to nowhere. And in 2001, he voted for the airline industry bailout. So what does Paul Ryan really believe? Does he believe that companies are too big to fail in some cases? In fairness, Governor Mitt Romney also supported TARP. Then-Senator Barack Obama voted for it, as did then-Senator Joe Biden. Both Obama and Biden also backed the auto bailout as well. But Ryan is supposed to be the alternative to big spending. Still, the core of what I wanted to ask the congressman about today, this last piece of that sound from 2008.
Madam Speaker, this bill offends my principles. But I'm going to vote for this bill in order to preserve my principles, in order to preserve this free enterprise system.
This bill offends my principles, but I'm going to vote for this bill to preserve my principles. What you need to know, what I'd like to know, what does that even mean? President Bush, at the same time, said that he abandoned free market principles to save the free market system. So how does that work? Congressman Ryan, which principle did you preserve by voting for TARP? What other principles can be preserved by abandoning them? I'd really like to know. And that is Reality Check.
So Paul Ryan is going to get interviewed by Brit Hume on Fox News. Now, Brit is almost like his defense attorney here, trying to help him build this case. But Ryan bungles it throughout. And you can see Brit Hume, as the interview goes on, getting a little frustrated, like, Paul, don't you mean to say this? Okay, so let's get started.
Doesn't your budget also contemplate very major savings from Medicare on something like the same amount?
Only President Obama raised $716 billion from the Medicare program. He cut $716 billion from the Medicare program to pay for Obamacare.
Right.
We don't do that.
Well, you make savings. How much?
The point, I joined the Romney ticket. And what Mitt Romney is proposing to do is repeal all of Obamacare.
Look, Brit, this is Fox News. You weren't supposed to throw me a little. Okay, so I'm not Romney. Yeah, in other words, his plan does the same exact thing as Obama's plan, and he doesn't have a good answer for that. Brit's going to try to help him out again. Again, Ryan's going to stumble. Let's have fun.
I get that. You're not saying, though, that you don't contemplate in your budget planning significant savings, upwards of $500 billion in Medicare, though, are you?
No. We can get into complicated baseline issues, but that's the current law.
So you don't contemplate making any savings in Medicare?
Well, we will make savings in Medicare for the next generation.
But it is the case that in the budget that you have passed through the House of Representatives, significant savings of upwards of $500 billion in Medicare.
We do not add cuts to Medicare program in the House budget. We don't take more cuts to Medicare.
Now, I'm a little unclear as to how that works. You make savings to prevent the program from going under, or what? How is this?
So here's the issue. What President Obama is trying to do with his Medicare plan is he's trying to count a dollar twice.
I love that. See, we're calling it savings. But he's robbing. He's stealing. We're saving. It seems to be the same thing. But anyway, oh yeah, Obama takes $2 for every $1. Ha ha. And when that doesn't work, go back to your first answer.
But let's be clear here, Britt. I am on the Romney ticket, and what Mitt Romney is proposing is to repeal all of Obamacare.
Get that.
Yeah, I love that. Exactly. All right, way to go. We're back on message here. I'm with Romney. Forget my plan. All right, well, let's talk about whether you're going to balance the budget. That's an interesting conversation.
Now, the budget plan that you are now supporting would get to balance when?
Well, there are different. The budget plan that Mitt Romney is supporting gets us down to 20% of GDP government spending by 2016. That means get the size of government back to where it historically has been. What President Obama has done is he has brought the size of government to as high as it hasn't been since World War II. We want to reduce the size of government so we can have more economic freedom.
I get that, but what about balance?
Well, I don't know exactly what a balance is because we haven't, I won't get wonky on you, but we haven't run the numbers on that specific plan.
Right.
Oops. I don't want to get wonky or anything like that, but we don't balance. We haven't run the numbers. Keep it going.
President Obama never once, ever, has offered a plan to ever balance the budget. The United States Senate, they haven't passed a budget in 3 years.
I understand that, but your own budget that you.
You're talking about the House budget.
I'm talking about the House budget.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is your budget is going to be a central issue in this plan.
The House budget.
When does that contemplate?
The House budget doesn't budget until the 2030s.
So, wait now. You're talking about my budget? wait, I mean balance. You're talking about balancing budget? I don't want to get wonky on you. But I'm in a lot of trouble here, Britt. Take it easy on me, okay? Anyway, he's bad. Remember, $2 for every $1. Remember that, okay? And what's the differences? Okay, well, let's find out.
Can you broadly outline the difference between your plan and his with numbers?
President Obama's plan?
And yours.
Sure.
Come on, dude.
We put the budget on a path to balance.
I get that.
We get government spending under control to where it historically has been.
So how much less do you spend than he would?
Well, under the trillions of dollars. But again, what we're doing is we're offering the Romney-Ryan plan.
Right.
So wait, let me get this right. Is it House budget, Obama budget, the Ryan budget, or the Romney budget? Because I'm with Romney. Okay, I know, dude. I don't want to get all wonky on you, but you're really confusing me with all this budget talk. All I know is we cut trillions more than that Obama sum. I tell you, man, $2 for every $1. Think about it. All right, so then he's going to ask him about Ayn Rand. Hey, listen, this woman is kind of a libertarian lunatic, you know, all this crazy talk that she's got about how handicapped children are subnormal, a woman should never be president of the United States, let alone her admiration for a serial killer, et cetera, et cetera. And she's an atheist. She hated Christians, right? Now, not every atheist hates Christians, but she saw them as weak and you know, these pathetic creatures in a sense. Did Paul Ryan say he loved Ayn Rand? Did he say over and over again that she was his moral guiding force? No, of course not. Let's watch.
It is said that you're a disciple of Ayn Rand. What is your view of Ayn Rand? Are you an Ayn Rand disciple? Is that a fair charge?
I really enjoyed her novels, Atlas Shrugged in particular. It triggered my interest in economics. That's where I got into studying economics. That's why I wanted to study the whole field of economics. I later in life learned about what her philosophy was. It's called objectivism. It's something I completely disagree with. It's an atheistic philosophy.
Oh, yeah. No, Ayn Rand's an atheist. You don't say. Well, I was just reading it, you know, for shits and giggles, and it turns she has a philosophy? Ayn Rand. I learned that later in life. I didn't know that. Oh, come on. That's the whole point of Ayn Rand, that she's the guiding light of you radical libertarians. She has a philosophy. Oh, come on, dude. How do you read her books and have them be your favorite books and didn't realize that she had a philosophy?